This was very early last night, first minute of the game between the Colts and the Broncos. Nyheim Hines catches a pass, takes a hit to the helmet, and we saw the term that we learned a couple of weeks ago from the concussion protocol, gross motor instability. Someone suggested derisively last night that that's the new term for getting knocked out. He wasn't knocked out. He's displaying the kind of wobbliness that will get you an immediate concussion evaluation under the current protocol. But under the inevitable new protocol, you are done for the night. Whatever it is that is causing you to wobble like that, whether it's your head or your back or some other condition, the new protocol, Peter, you are going to be shut down. And we knew from last night it was bad enough we weren't going to see him again, and we didn't. But that was the kind of stuff Tua Tagovailoa was doing 12 days ago, and he still ended up back in the game. And that really addresses the broader picture here. Where do things stand with Tua Tagovailoa in the investigation? There was some interesting information in the pregame last night because Richard Sherman, even though he's retired, he's still on the NFLPA executive committee until his term ends. So he said during the Amazon pregame that the union believes the protocols weren't followed in the Tagovailoa situation, and that the NFL apparently believes they were. And that Dr. Alan Sills is of the mind that they operated out of an abundance of caution before they let Tua Tagovailoa back in that game against the Bills. And Sherman said, if that's an abundance of caution, what would recklessness have looked like? They let him back in the game when the union believed that that wobbliness we saw from Tua Tagovailoa was enough for him to be done for the day. If it's his head, obviously. If it's his back, obviously. So they're kind of at loggerheads right now. And this has never happened before, Peter. They've done plenty of joint investigations under the concussion protocol, and they've always agreed on what the outcome should be. And it sounds like right now, because they wanted to have this done yesterday so the new protocol would be in place for week 5. Right now, it sounds like the union and the league are at an impasse. And the only way this gets resolved is grievance and arbitration. If they can't come to an agreement on whether or not the protocols were followed, it sounds like the league believes they were and the union believes they weren't.
Yeah, and, you know, the only important thing is last night when you saw the Nyheim Hines thing, or Nyheim Hines, excuse me, what I just thought immediately is he's done for the night no matter whether he's got a stone in his shoe, and that's causing him to wobble. It doesn't matter. It's over. And that is the healthiest thing, all things considered, for this game. And, Mike, I do think that the Players Association, I like them taking a stand in this case. And I like them erring on the side of extreme caution and pushing for this. And I root for them to, to push this as far as they can. Because, look, it's like what Rob Ninkovich told me the other day, the retired Patriot, told me 2 things for my column last week, the other day. He said, look, if I were, if I were a 54-year-old Tua Tagovailoa, I'd write a letter to my 24-year-old self and say, what were you thinking? And going back in the game. And the other thing that he said that I thought was really enlightening and absolutely real is I had a choice to go back to the Patriots. Bill Belichick, and I didn't write this, but Bill Belichick was coming after me, and he said, look, you don't even have to play in training camp. Just come in for the season, and you can just basically show up for the season, and you can make X amount of dollars and everything. And he said, I had to decide whether one more year and 850 hits in the head was worth the money that I was going to make. And he said, of course you're not happy with bypassing that money and ending the dream of a football career. But to me, the 850 hits part in the helmet, it wasn't worth it. So I retired. And I think that is what I looked at this game last night. I saw Nyheim Hines. He's not going to I doubt he's going to retire out of this. But I look at players now who retired before the end, before they get kicked out. And I think so many of them have to be thinking exactly the same thing. What am I going to be like when I'm 54 years old? I need to be concerned with that now.
That doesn't happen, though, because when you're that age, 54 may as well be 540. When you're in your early to mid-20s, you're not thinking decades down the road. You're barely thinking weeks down the road. That's just the mindset. That's the way the human body is constituted at that age. I remember being that age. The thought of being 57 when I was 21, I don't want to think about that. First of all, I may not live that long. Second of all, man, that's old. I don't want to think about that. So you don't think about that. You don't think about how your life's going to be. You just assume, well, when I'm 57 years old, if I live that long, I'll have the problems that somebody 57 years old has. I'll worry about them then. For now, I'm going to be young, have fun, and drink Pepsi. I mean, that was the whole attitude, and I think that's still the attitude. So you have to, seriously, you have to get people who simply aren't wired to think about their future selves to think about their future selves. Because the players, and that's the push and pull here, Peter. This is what it all comes down to. And this leads to the other topic I want to get your thoughts on. The players don't care. They don't care about having a concussion. I'd rather have a concussion than a knee injury. We've talked about that time and again. Larry Fitzgerald offering, and he said it himself, to pay the fines of the players who would get penalized financially for hitting him illegally in the helmet. Do that, please. I'll pay your fine because I don't want you taking out my knees and tearing my ACL, and then I'm screwed for a whole year. Concussion goes away. That's their attitude. And it goes with territory. It's part of what we signed up for. It's a badge of honor to cross that thick white stripe and know I may get a concussion. And when I come back, I may get another one. And for all those years, guys were going back in the games with concussions. Nobody ever died. I mean, they're telling themselves that. Hey, I'm a professional athlete. I know what I'm doing. Let me do it. Well, Tom Brady said earlier this week, he watches UFC. If you've ever watched UFC and you see the blatant and naked brutality that goes on there, a guy gets punched 7 times in the head before the referee can literally dive on top of the fallen fighter who's getting blasted in the head. Concussion, 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 concussion. It's far more brutal than football right now. So the players don't have a problem with it. Peter, this is all about, I think, 2 things. One, 13 years ago this month, Congress decided to get involved and force the NFL to take concussions more seriously, even if the players aren't. And 2, this is about the future supply of NFL players. This is about allowing mom and dad to think little Jimmy or Johnny is safe playing football at a younger age. So we need to have protocols that work here, because if they don't work here, they got no chance working at the local high school. So we're trying to set the standard and have it trickle down. And it's basically one big PR effort to get parents to let their kids keep playing football. That's why these guys are taken out and not put back in. That's why there's this abundance of caution. And I know the union is currently saying we want our players treated like patients, but the problem is the players don't want to be treated like patients. The players want to play football.
Look, Mike, I think the point you just made about the parents is so vitally important. Because if the NFL is seen as either reckless or for some reason uncaring in this particular story, regardless of what the truth is, image is everything in this particular case. And right now, the NFL justifiably is under attack for allowing Tua Tagovailoa to play a football game again after demonstrating gross motor instability, and then playing 4 days later and getting a concussion in that game. And, look, I think I asked in my column this week, I asked parents of players, youth football players, to write in to me to say, what's your level of concern right now? And the best letter I got was from a guy from Andover, Massachusetts, who wrote that he was watching the football game on Sunday, and then obviously watched the game on Thursday night, and there's Tua Tagovailoa laid out, stretchered off the field, and his wife turns to him and says, they have a kid who's 9 years old, and here's a guy who's played 4 years of high school football, 4 years of college football. And his wife turns to him at that moment as being stretchered off and says to him, that is why Charlie is not playing football. And this guy told me that it was, I don't know if he used the word his dream, but he wanted his kid to get the same lessons from football that he got. But now he can't argue with his wife. And look, Mike, we're never going to have the issue in Florida or Texas or Louisiana or Georgia. But the question is, what about all the high school kids from all these areas of the country where you don't play high school football to get a college scholarship and to try to make the NFL? What about all these places where, you know, you have mom and dad and you know, all the family, you know, you've got 200 people at the high school game, and you've got the traditional Thanksgiving game, and you've got all these things. It's just a leisure time activity. You take it seriously, but you're not playing so you can get a scholarship to Alabama. These are the places where people are going to turn away from football. They're going to turn to other sports, and they're basically going to say, I'll be damned if I'm going to let my kid's developing brain at age 10, 12, 14, 16, you know, slosh around in his head with crappy helmets and on, you know, when we're not even sure how good these coaches are on our team in paying attention to things like helmet-to-helmet hits. So the NFL has a crisis on its hands, in my opinion. And that's why, if I were the NFL, I would err on the side of extreme caution. And I don't know what exactly the NFLPA is asking for in talking to the NFL about this. We don't know. But the one thing I would say is I would probably agree with what the NFLPA wants to do right now, because the very essence of the sport, unless you want every kid to play flag football instead of real football, the essence of the sport, I'm not saying it's at stake, but it really is under fire right now.
Well, you're absolutely right. And it's something that had been dormant for several years. It is something that had been improving for several years, but the Tua Tagovailoa situation lit a fuse that burned quickly between Sunday and Thursday night. And, Peter, there's one last wrinkle here that I want to talk to you about. You and I haven't talked about this at all. I don't know where you stand on this, but what happened on Sunday night in Tampa Bay with Cameron Brate, in my mind, at the end of the day, it was an expert move by the NFL and the NFLPA to brush this thing under the rug. Because I think what happened with Cameron Brate actually is more alarming for parents of kids who may or may not play football than what we saw with Tua. Because what we saw with Cameron Brate was a guy who hit his head against a teammate, clearly hit his head. The protocol was not activated by anyone. And you've got two spotters in the booth watching the action. And nobody said, we should check this guy out for a concussion. And the NFL's official position to me eventually was the spotters decided he hit his shoulder. And the union backed them up, Peter. And our lying eyes told us otherwise. Look, if you haven't seen it, where's the shoulder? His head goes right into Chris Godwin's chest. And the NFL's official position on the record was the spotters clearly saw that he hit his shoulder. And, Peter, I think that they've circled the wagons here, including the union, because they understand we can't have, just days after the Tua Tagovailoa debacle, a situation where a guy clearly hit his head and somehow managed to get back in the game before anyone bothered to wake up and check him for a concussion. And luckily for Cameron Brate and his family, but also for the sport, he didn't suffer another head injury while he was back in the game, having the ball thrown to him in that final drive of the first half. So, you already know what I think about it. I don't know what you think about it, but to me, in some ways, that moment was more alarming, and I think it explains why the NFL and the NFLPA got it under control, and nobody's talking about it. Let's not talk about this, because this shows that it may be impossible, especially at the lower level, to ever provide the level of safety that parents are looking for.
Mike, you know, when I first saw that, I wasn't watching the game Sunday night. I was coming back from Philadelphia. I covered the Eagles on Sunday. But I saw a replay of it, and my first question is, the NFL has to talk to the spotters. And the NFL has to basically, they should have a Zoom meeting with the spotters this week. And they should play a tape of that and said, this is cause for the player who did leave the field with the help of Tristan Wirfs after that play. But this is cause for a player to undergo a complete exam in either in the blue medical tent or in the locker room, because it just simply doesn't look right. Okay? You can say whatever you want. Well, it's the shoulder. Oh, it's the head. It's the neck. It's whatever it is. You saw it. He's laying on the ground. He, sort of semi-crumpled to the ground. I mean, that is the kind of play where you got to call down and say, get that guy out of the game, put him in the blue tent, do an exam on him right now. That's why those guys are there. And just as I think those guys failed the situation in the Tua Tagovailoa, thing, I mean, you need to have the spotters upstairs basically being more severe and more strict on what they say to take people off the field.
You're absolutely right, Peter. And I think the reason why it was all brushed under the rug by the league and the union, if I'm a parent and I have a kid that's approaching the age of playing football and I understand what happened on Sunday night, that even with the most stringent protocols and unlimited resources available to have people there, making sure that someone who suffered a blow to the head is properly checked out before they're allowed to go back in the game, if they can't get it right 10 out of 10 times, what chance does my kid have in the local high school system of being pulled out of the game when he suffers a blow to the head, when people aren't being paid to sit there and watch every moment of every piece of action on the field? Two of them, a certified athletic trainer and an unaffiliated neurotrauma consultant. And it wasn't away from the action. It was the guy who had the ball, and his head slams into a teammate's chest. And what do we get when we ask questions about it? We get, sorry to say it, alternative facts. Because it wasn't his shoulder. It was his head. But they didn't want to take what happened with Tua and push it to a higher level and suffer the PR consequences and potential damage to the future supply of football players. And I'm sorry, but if we're ever going to fix this, you can't just ignore it publicly and say we're going to do better behind the scenes. You have to own it. You have to admit it. And you have to move on. Hi, it's Mike Florio. Thanks for watching PFT on YouTube. Hit subscribe for the latest news and analysis from Pro Football Talk.